two wonderful things. So God builds a fire. Moses, like a bug to the flame, got to go see why it keeps burning. Gets up there, take off your shoes. This is holy ground. And so Moses is now being sent as an emissary, an envoy, an ambassador, a spokesman for God to let the people go. To tell Pharaoh it is time to let the people out of Egypt and let them go on their way. Now, if you're Pharaoh and you're scared about these people overruling you and overrunning you, why would you not want these people to leave? You ever think about that? Why was Pharaoh so anxious to keep these people here? Okay, the whole economy is built on this slavery. Yeah. What are you saying? Yeah. You know, first of all, it was punishment, and after a while, it's like, hey, this is pretty good, right? This is nice stuff. Yeah. Graham's about to go to college. Who's going to mow my yard? Right? You know, all these jobs that your teenage kids do, and, you know, they move out, and you're like, uh-oh. You know, what do we do now? Well, that's what was going on with the Israelites. And so he doesn't want them to leave. And so second to that is this God issue, which we're about to have. And so as Moses comes to him, of course, you know, how do you know you're a spokesman from God? They throw their staves on the ground, and the staves turn into snakes. The magicians can do the same thing, but God's snake eats their snake. You got the leprosy. They can just about imitate anything. The Egyptians can. And so their magic is pretty powerful. You turn the Nile River to blood. They can turn water to blood, but they can't take it back. Men can punish, but men can't heal the way God can heal. All right, 10 plagues, and maybe you memorize those in Bible class. One of the interesting things about each plague is it affects a god in Egypt. And so the River Nile is a god. Frogs are a god. Gnats are a god. The sun is a god. Health is a god. And so what you start seeing is the sun, the darkness is a god, God Ray. You start going through and you begin seeing all the gods of Egypt fall one by one. You know, who is this God of these slaves? And if this God of the slaves is so powerful, why are his people slaves? Well, you start seeing them drop one by one, each god. God number 10, which is Pharaoh, and Pharaoh's son dies. And so at that point, we've realized this is not working. This is not working. We need to get these people out of here. And Pharaoh, in mourning and rage, says, get out of here. And they're so anxious to have them leave, they give them all the gold, all the treasure which has been accumulated, and send them on their way. Then they have second thoughts, decide they're either going to kill them or enslave them again. And God parts the Nile, brings his people through, and then crushes the Egyptian army and makes them to be free. Now, what's the purpose of the plagues? Number one, to show Egypt who God is. But number two, who else needed to see who God is? The Israelites. Who is this God? Gone 400 years. They didn't know who God was. And they had not learned much about God. And what's interesting, and you'll read this as you go through as they're coming through the wilderness, God's taking care of Israel, not because of Israel, but because of his promise that he had with Abraham. I love Abraham enough to take care of these kids, to take care of his children. And so Israel needed to know who God is. All the way back, Exodus 3, Moses says, God, when they ask me who you are, who do I tell them? Are you Ra? Are you, who are you? Of these Egyptian gods, which one do you happen to be? Okay, Yahweh, Jehovah, as we say, I am. Now, what's I am mean? First of all, it says, I was, I am, and I will always be. Time does not control it. Stronger than that, when you read in the Hebrew, that word I am means I'm with you. The whole Hebrews 13, 4 and 5, therefore the Lord has promised he'll never leave you nor forsake you. That is your word Yahweh coming through, in the Greek, of course, but it's a concept coming through. God is with you. God is always among you. So he's not the God of the sky, and he's not the God of the ground. He's not the God of gold or silver or wine or beer. He's the God that's with you and will always be there. And that's what that name means. That's the power that's there. So it's not the American God or the Russian God or the African God. Wherever people are, God is there. He'll never leave us nor forsake us. So we come across and we see where this happens. They come through the Red Sea. They're now a people, and God has to ensure that there are people. So they come to Mount Sinai. And as they're at Mount Sinai, remember there's a rumbling, pealings, a thunder happening from the mountain. Moses goes up on the mountain, receives the 10 Commandments. And so what is it that we have happening with all this stuff to get us ready to be who God wants us to be? Let me find where my thing is. Okay. We are about this section, if you're reading in notes. And I know in these classes, I'm like an Acts 8:4 guy. What's Acts 8:4 say? They went everywhere preaching the word, okay? And there's sometimes I get distracted and I go down one thing or the other. It's one of the reasons I write all this out, because this is what I should say. But I just get excited about all this stuff. Okay, so here's what we're working. What do these people need to learn about God? Number one, they need to witness God's awesome and terrifying power. There's only one God to serve. There's only one God. Now, the Hebrews had learned from their Egyptian captors, there's the God of death, and that's a big deal. There's a God of the sun. There's a God of the Nile, which always gives life. And so there's all these different gods, and depending on your guild or depending on your trade or depending on your family, that's the God you would choose. God is pretty clear that there's nobody to follow but him. And as you read the wanderings through the wilderness and the dealings with the Egyptians, it becomes pretty clear. One God. That's the one you worry about. You don't worry about all these others. They're not true gods like our God is. And so as they travel through the wilderness, that's going to be hammered home over and over and over. Number two, you're a people, okay? 12 tribes of Israel, Asher and Naphtali and Judah. And you go through, there's 12 tribes, 12 families. You're one nation. And so each one of those tribes are camped around the tabernacle because they all have an equal relationship with God. Every one of those people have the same God and have the same law. They have the same everything about them. And when you run through the book of Leviticus, you run across a lot of rules that are really weird, right? You read through them and you think, why in the world do they have those rules? You know, why is it God did not allow them to eat barbecue and eat catfish? You know, you can't be a Southern Jew hardly, right? Why did they have these things? Why did they circumcise on the 8th day? Why did they do this or that or whatever else? And there's a lot of things, but what it did was it made them a people. It made them different than any other nation that is around. There's a guy, he teaches over at Harding. He's going to retire in the next few years. But I love listening to him whenever I have an opportunity at lectureships or whatever else, because he focuses on archaeology. And every summer, he takes some kids from Harding, and they go and they will, dig through and, different camps and such and kind of do different studies. But one of the things that he says is when you're digging up a city, especially when you're looking at different years in the city, you can always tell where the Jews live. He said, the way you judge anybody, he said, this is true today even, the way you judge a person is you go through their trash. Because that's what they don't hide, right? And as you go through their garbage, you see what they eat, you see what they do in life, you see what their hobbies are. You judge a person by going through his trash. Please don't go through my trash, but that's just what I've heard, okay? You can always tell when you're in a Jewish encampment. And you can tell when the Gentiles have taken over and conquered, or when the Jews have conquered, or when the Gentiles have moved back in, because what they eat. Suddenly there is no pork. Suddenly you can tell that they're following certain rituals, certain ways, that the altars are different, the houses are different, everything is different. And so God made his people different, and it made it where, they were separated from the world. And so what God is doing in the Old Testament is he is bringing a people that look like everybody else, and he's making them very unique. And he's giving them a national identity, which is very powerful, because that national identity needs to last about 2,000 or 3,000 years until the time of Jesus, Galatians 4:4. And so that's one of the reasons for the law of Moses. Number three, you're traveling with almost 3 million people through, it's not quite a desert, but it's wilderness. Where do you get food? Where do you get water? How in the world are you going to go by the Amalekites and not have them just pick you apart and destroy you? You're facing all sorts of tough folks. God put them in this difficult situation so they would learn to trust God. James 1, beginning in verse 2, right? Consider it pure joy whenever you face fears and trials of many kinds. The testing of your faith produces perseverance, and that perseverance finishes its work so that you're mature and complete in Jesus Christ, right? Parallel passage to that is Romans 5, 6 through 8. Talks about how it makes us stronger. They learn God will take care of you. And so it's okay when you are standing in front of Goliath and he is 9 feet tall because God takes care of you. It's okay when you're facing the Midianites and you're Gideon and they've got more people than you can count and you're sitting here with 300 because God takes care of you. And so that's the lesson that's being taught here. Okay, number 4, okay, you learn, don't make God angry. All right? Don't make God angry. They'd watch Korah standing over there rebelling against Moses. The earth just swallows them up. Okay? They would watch whenever somebody fought against them, hailstones and lightning would come and destroy an entire army. They saw that they would go into slavery if they were not faithful to God. They learned you do not make God angry. But they also learned, going all the way back to Genesis 6:5, God is a God of grace. God is a God of love, and he's a God of mercy. And so they began learning more about who this God is and how God takes care of them through every situation that they face. And so this is a big transition, if you will, when we're going through the genealogy of Jesus, because the first 4 or 5 lessons, we've dealt with individuals. You got Abraham. Okay? Abraham's decisions affected Abraham. It affected his kids, but it's him. You got Isaac, same way. You got Jacob, same way. All right? Even Judah, that we looked at last week, now we're talking about a nation. We're talking about a lot of people. And we'll still talk about the individuals in those people, but now you see the blossoming, if you will. God has formed himself a nation. And so these 40 years that they're in the wilderness, after they've been brought out to Egypt, they're given an identity. They're shown who God is, and they're shown why you need to be faithful and why you need to follow God. And so as we're going through this, and we'll talk about this a little bit in tonight's lesson, Lord willing, what you're going to see is at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, you see Moses give his faithful or unfaithful pledge. And Joshua is going to do the exact same thing, Joshua 23 and 24. We always focus on 24:15 of Joshua. You know, choose this day who you will serve, whether it be the gods of the Midianites, Perizzites, or whoever. As for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. The context of that goes all the way back to chapter 23. And what it is both Joshua and Moses, near the end of their life, say, okay, people, here's the deal. If you follow God, God's going to make your vineyards grow. He's going to cause your flocks to increase. He's going to make it where you're never conquered and life is great. He's going to bless you with children. He is going to bless you in every way that's measurable. And so that's why you need to be faithful to God. If you are unfaithful to God, you will go into slavery. You will have droughts and you will have famine. You will not be able to have children. Everything in your life is going to fall apart. And every measurable aspect that you look at, it will not work. And so as Moses says, I set before you this day life and death. Choose which way you're going to go. As Joshua says, I'm following God. I don't know about y'all, but I am following God. That makes Joshua Southern, doesn't it? Make him Northern. I don't know about you guys. Which way are you going to go? What are you going to do? And so this choice is set before them of how they're going to live. So it's a long road. It's a long road of learning how to trust God, of how to follow God, and of all these ways that you're going to get there. So Numbers 14, we get to the promised land, and it's amazing. It's taken us we stayed at Sinai about 2 years. The journey takes about 6 months, and they're at the promised land. 3 years. And they're coming up from the south. God says, take your 12, send them in to spy out the land. And they go and they come back and say, wow, the grapes are so huge that 2 men have to put them on a pole and carry them. There is more food there. It is a greater place than anywhere we've been. But we're grasshoppers compared to those giants in that land. There is no way we're going to overcome those walls of those fortifications. There's no way we'll ever survive. We can't do it. Had 40 years learning about who God is and the provision, and the lessons have not stayed. Or they've had 4 years. The lessons have not stayed. 2, Joshua and Caleb say our God is bigger than our enemies. We need to trust God. He's gotten us through the Red Sea. He's fed us and watered us. We need to go. They listen to the 10, and so God brings them back, and for the next 38 years, they wander around the wilderness. They travel until every person is dead except Joshua and Caleb. God has formed a nation. The nation's not what it should be, so he's reforming a nation. He's creating himself a people who are ready to receive his promises. And he's waiting for that time to come. So now, here we are. Moses has died. Joshua is alive. It's time for him to take over. We open up in Joshua chapter 1. I got to hurry again. We open up. That preacher keeps talking too long. All right. We open up Joshua chapter 1. This man shows up with a sword in Joshua's tent. Joshua says, "Are you for me or against me?" What's a man say? Is he for him or against him? Neither. He says, "I'm with God. And if you're with God, you will be successful." Is God on my side? Yes and no. If I'm with God, he'll always be for me. It's not God on my side, it's me on being on God's side, is what Joshua 1's about. So now we send out 2 spies. I think Joshua's learned a lesson. He says, "You come report directly to me." They go out and look through the land. Everything looks great. We go to Jericho. All right. So we go to Jericho, huge city, great walls. They go in, and they go to the house of Rahab the prostitute, Rahab the harlot. Now, in our present day, people clean this up and say, well, harlot could mean an innkeeper. Or maybe she was a former harlot. We clean it up. The Bible doesn't clean it up. This is a lady who you would not expect to be a good person. She's a woman making it on her own without a husband, as far as we know. Okay, that sounds strange. But in that culture, that was very strange. It wouldn't be so strange today. In that culture, that was a red flag. She's a Canaanite. Canaanites need to all die, is what we're going to learn as we go through Joshua, because of their sinfulness and idolatry. And she's a prostitute. This is not who you would think you would go to find a person of faith. But she's there, Matthew 1, 3, and 4. Well, they come to her, and she says, "Let me hide you, because the king of Jericho is looking for you." And then afterwards she says, "We know everything about you. We've heard what happened to Egypt, what's happened to everybody who's faced against you, and I know that your God is going to hand this city over to you. And because this city is about to be handed over to you, I want you to save me and my family." All right? What I want us to notice here is here's the tipping point of Israel finally having the courage to come in. These spies have traveled through. Okay, real quick. These spies have traveled through. They don't know where they're going to go or not. Rahab says, "It's yours." And she protects them. The scarlet thread, which represents the Passover, and for us, Jesus. And because of the faith of Rahab, now the conquest of Israel can go forth and do well. All right.